Hey everyone, Thyworm here. I know it's been a while, but with this channel mostly focused on Last Epoch and just a few other games that have done well over the past, there's not much to talk about. I haven't played the game in months, so I don't make builds. I do make weekly content on the second channel, the Indie Investigator, if you want to hear me still talk about indie games. Last week, however, a post dropped from EHG discussing the near future. I read the whole thing a few times and I've thought about it for a while, and I came to the conclusion that I'm simply past the point of getting excited for this until it actually drops. It's just words now, and I want to see if they're actually pulling it off or not. My main issue with this post is that it is just that, a post. It's going to take a bit more time for the multiplayer patch to drop, and until then I personally don't really mind anymore which parts of the game are currently working in multiplayer and which aren't, as long as it's working when the patch drops, right? I appreciate the transparency, don't get me wrong, and the effort of writing posts like this, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It is safe to say I have lost interest for now until I can see it for myself. Let's dive into the actual post. The first notable topic in the post is that the multiplayer servers are available now 24/7 if you are a community tester. I am not, personally, but if you are, you can play multiplayer 24/7. That launched yesterday, September 8th, and there are currently around 1,000 people testing multiplayer, which is a sizable number. Second topic, performance. Last Epoch is one of the worst optimized AA games out there, and despite many performance patches over the last 3.5 years, that situation hasn't changed. This upcoming patch has yet again a significant focus on performance, and based on the small gifs of a dragon fight, there is yet again a sizable increase in performance, but I've become very skeptical about this, and I just want to experience this game actually running well when I'm playing a necromancer or bee build or totem build in single player, and if at that point the game actually performs like you would expect, I will be happy. That being said, the gains they're making look promising. I just want to see that in my own game, however, before I raise the glass and toast to optimization. Third topic, a change in melee, throw and bow damage. If you're familiar with Last Epoch's base spell damage, you know it is adaptive on gear. That means that if you wield a staff that does spell damage, it states it does, for example, 80 adaptive spell damage. It is adaptive because if you cast a fireball, it turns into 80 fire spell damage, and if you cast earthquake, it turns into 80 physical spell damage. This is all base damage, by the way. Attack damage, on the other hand, didn't have such a system. The base attack damage wasn't adaptive, but always of a static certain element, and in 90% of the cases it was physical attack damage. Most damage types on gear are physical. You can find ways in the skill tree nodes to convert that damage into other elements, but if such a node isn't there, you're stuck with base damage you can't really leverage and skill with. To deal with this issue, which isn't really an issue in my opinion, they have now changed weapons so that they basically work like spell gear, just using melee damage. There's no element attached to it anymore. It is practically adaptive attack damage now, with the only difference being that it can be melee, bow or throwing damage. The devs are saying this should increase build diversity, but that is a questionable statement, because yeah, you can now use pretty much any weapon with any build, which you could argue is build diversity, but because you can use any weapon, there will be a clear winner per build because any weapon goes now, therefore limiting build diversity actually. With a change like this, a differentiator on gear is largely lost, making a vast number of weapons just unsuitable for any build, leaving you with only a few options. So you can really argue both ways here in terms of build diversity. Fact remains, it becomes a lot easier to create builds now, which is in line with the design pillar that Last Epoch has, because it wants to be an accessible game. But making builds too easy to play is potentially also an issue and may lead to a situation where people feel that anything goes. And then you do a tier 4 dungeon and you notice that is not the case, really only 1% of the builds work. There has to be a balance in that, I feel, to educate players a bit if they want to push endgame content. Changes like this may lead to the opposite effect. Time will tell. Topic number 4, ailments. I honestly once again don't see an issue here, but they are replacing lines like 10% increased ignite effect with plus 10% fire penetration with ignite. I don't know. This also really doesn't interest me too much, I'll be honest. Then the devs noticed that Ailment tends to favor faster hitting builds. Yeah, no shit Sherlock, because Last Epoch doesn't take the damage of the hit into account when applying an ailment, like Path of Exile does. It just applies the ailment no matter how hard you hit, and because of that, this is now an issue. As a result, they're limiting ailment stacks even more, shrinking the shock ailment max stacks to 10 and poison shred stacks to a maximum of 30. I personally think it's bad design when you have to resort to solutions like this, putting a cap on ailment stacks in an ARPG. Topic number 5. Updated visuals. They're teasing a few new skills and it sure looks a lot better than before. I can see the progress here. These are relatively quick wins, of course, a bit of fresh paint, new models, new effects. I'm not saying it's easy, but this always works out, right? It should also add to the combat feel, which is still very hard to judge without playing the actual game. Because a game can look cool but feel bad when you are behind the keyboard yourself. The new enemies look dope though. That leads us to topic number 6, the sound design. I have been very critical about Last Epoch's music and sound design so far. Music has improved lately. I think the last track they shared from Within the End of Time was spot on, which is great to hear. Sound effects, however, tend to be very sharp. They have a lot of treble and high frequency tones for some reason, and they're lacking lower frequencies, so bass. Also, the overall mixing was completely off, making them sound imbalanced, and while you may not hear any of this, you can surely tell the sound effects tend to be flimsy and powerless. Sound design also plays a huge factor in combat feel. It is something that PoE does very well, for example. Same with the music on that front. And I'm glad to see the new results in this video they released, because the sound has improved a lot. Have a listen. The one thing that is awfully absent, the one thing they didn't talk about in this post, despite the focus on multiplayer, is trade. This is one of the hottest Last Epoch potatoes right now. No one knows how they will implement it, no one knows why they are against just regular trade, simply no one has any clue. And it's kind of a thing, you know, trade. It might seriously harm the experience for some, depending on the implementation, and I feel they should clarify what trade will be before launching the multiplayer patch, because it is not fair to those wanting multiplayer badly to get into the game, only to learn later that a cool item they found cannot be traded with their buddies. That would be horrible and really bad PR, so I'm expecting clarification on trade before this thing launches. Time for some closing thoughts, which are basically my opening thoughts. There's no release date yet for 0.9, the multiplayer patch. I would expect it hits this year, and seeing the progress sometime in October is likely. Would be a good time too, it's a quiet month, the PoE League is then 2 months old, so they might get a good influx of PoE content creators, and I would return to the game as well. Until then, I'm simply a bit indifferent about these posts. I enjoy reading them, I appreciate the effort the devs put into writing them, but I just can't get excited about this anymore after 3.5 years. The game is just temporarily dead until it's being revived by multiplayer, and hopefully that resurrection goes with a bang and a lot of players. So many people have been waiting for this and so many are excited, so they have to deliver. If I'm walking around Itera with some people in Discord and I'm seeing 30 FPS on my screen, I'm going to be very disappointed. All I want is a stable game that feels good to play with decent endgame. I'm not asking for anything else, and given the ambitions of the devs, I don't think this is too much to ask. This patch promises to deliver on performance and combat feel. Hopefully endgame will become a bit more interesting, although I doubt that'll happen before launch. And until then, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, feel free to subscribe for more Last Epoch content, and I'll see you when the patch drops most likely.